Chapter 1. The Town. Rich Justice placed one more woodblock, then backed up a few steps to admire the progress. His team of builders followed him to the edge of the worksite, then turned back to look at the skeleton of a house that lay before them. It still needed a lot of work, but it was coming along quite nicely. Rich squinted at the horizon and watched as the sun lowered itself to the ground.
"Quitting time!"
he called, and the workers all cheered. The worksite became an anthill as workers rushed around and cleaned up any stray objects lying around. After gathering up their stuff, they slowly filtered back toward the town, nodding or waving to Rich as they left. A breeze whooshed through the clearing, ushering in the shadows of the night, and Rich picked up his tools and slung them over his shoulder, whistling a merry tune as he followed the last worker out of the site. Right before he got out of the sight of the new building, he turned back to give it a final glance. It wasn't a pretty sight yet, with the dirt and the ladders and nothing filling it in, but it would be someday soon, and the feeling that gave him was of utmost contentment. He was a builder, a creator. His great-grandfather started this town, and it was beautiful. He turned away from the site and started down the path to his home. As he walked, he thought of his amazing life. He and his friends were creating a town worth living in, protected from all sides, and growing into a cohesive community. He looked at each house on the sides of the road and knew he had helped build most of them. The wind picked up again, chilling Rich so that he drew his cloak closer around him. The feeling of contentment was dulled, and an ominous tugging began to sound inside his head. But the breeze died down again, and the feeling disappeared. He dismissed it. What could possibly harm them in their village? He could look around and see the 9-foot walls that protected them from the outside, and almost every way he gazed, he could find an ocelot lurking in the shadows or lounging on a fence to keep creepers away from the walls. He himself owned the 3 most dependable ocelots in the town, who had been trained to patrol the walls. He turned the corner and spotted his house at the end of the street, bigger than the rest but not excessively large. The breeze reappeared, but instead of making him cold, it carried the smell of a roasting chicken down the street, and he knew that he was coming home to a hot dinner. But as he trudged down the cobblestone street, the feeling of something wrong came back. He didn't know how, but the peaceful scene in front of him was in danger somehow. Unconsciously, his steps lengthened, and he started glancing around him, seeking for the danger. And then he heard it, barely audible, but definitely there. He stopped in shock. Not possible. Slowly he turned around toward where the sound came from. A solitary creeper stood in the center of the street. It seemed disoriented, shaken, and it gazed around in confusion. But then its crimson eyes landed on Rich. The perpetual frown it wore deepened, and it started to creep forward on its short legs. His hands shaking, Rich hefted his axe off his shoulder and pointed it at the creeper.
"Don't come any closer! I'm warning you!"
The creeper paused and watched him carefully. Its eyes seemed to focus on his trembling hands. Suddenly, Rich heard the sound again, but this time from behind him. He swung around and found himself inches away from another creeper. With a frightened cry, the axe slipped from his fingers, and he flung himself away from the explosive monster, landing on his back. He watched in terror as it bulged and shook, and he scrambled away from it before it exploded. The blast threw him backwards, and he slammed into something soft and yielding. Ears ringing, Rich picked himself up. His vision was swimming, but he could see another green shape on the ground beneath him. He staggered away and leaned against a tree. Glancing back, he could see that the shape was a creeper, but it wasn't moving. The collision must have killed it. The explosion had left a crater in the street, and doors were opening up and down the street as people came to see the cause of the noise. His wife, Diane, rushed down the street with their son Ian in tow behind her.
Rich? Rich! What happened? Are you all right? We had an explosion and... Oh!
Rich saw her spot the dead creeper, and she pulled Ian close.
Did you kill that?
A crowd had started to gather. Concerned citizens from all parts of the town come to see if they could help. Rich cleared his throat.
"No."
He heard a raspy cough and realized it had come from him.
"Well, yes. Not on purpose."
Someone stepped forward from the crowd, who Rich recognized as Sam, a newcomer but eager to work.
If the creeper is dead, what caused the explosion?
Sam looked worried.
Creepers don't leave a body, they leave a crater.
He pointed at the hole in the street. Rich straightened up.
There were 2 of them.
The crowd let out a faint gasp. One creeper was plausible. It could have sneaked through a small hole in their defenses. A moment where there were no cats, something which wasn't likely to happen again. But 2 creepers? That meant something was wrong with their walls. Heavy footsteps rocked the floor, and the sound of iron hitting stone rang through the town. The town golem ran around the corner and thundered down the street with a cat sitting on each shoulder, holding on for dear life. The crowd parted to let him pass, and he slowed to a stop next to Rich. He was a full meter taller than anyone else in the village, and his iron arms were made to crush and destroy. But his touch was gentle when he reached down to Rich. They grasped hands, his small flesh hand in the giant's cold, solid one, and Rich knew that he had a message. He turned to the crowd and took a deep breath.
This isn't the end.
His words shocked himself, but he kept speaking.
There are more creepers around town.
He glanced up at the golem, who nodded his giant head. Iron golems could not speak, but they could still manage to get a message across, simply through the way they held themselves. And the intensity in him couldn't mean anything other than danger.
We need weapons.
Rich raised his fist into the air.
Swords, axes, picks, anything you can get.
He took a step towards his fallen axe and stumbles. His foot sent a searing shock of pain up his leg, and he nearly fell over. But the giant steadied him with one massive arm. Limping forward, he picked up his axe, then turned back to the crowd.
Go and find everyone else. Wake them up, shake them out of their beds. Grab weapons and tools. Be ready to fight for your lives.
The crowd hesitated, and then Sam turned around and pushed his way through. The rest started to follow him like a wave toward the shore. Rich watched them, proud of the town. They could act as one even when the threat of destruction hung over their heads. But then, from the edges of the crowd, screams began. Rich watched the wave break up and retreat. No longer a cohesive unit, but a herd of terrified animals. He felt himself go cold, and he tugged on the golem. Instantly understanding, the iron giant lifted him up, and Rich was able to see the creepers appearing from between the houses, from behind trees, emerging from the shadows, and walking steadily toward the crowd. More and more appeared from every side. Too many. The golem put Rich down again, and he hefted his axe and ran forward, the limp forgotten. He heard the heavy footsteps of the golem running behind him, and led the way through the scattered crowd. He attacked the first creeper he saw, smacking it upside its soft skull, and it fell to the ground. In the back of his mind, he wondered where the ocelots were. They should have prevented something like this mass of creepers from ever happening, but for some reason they were missing. As he attacked another creeper, he heard a frightened yowl, and his question was answered. A single ocelot, out of its mind with fear, ran from a group of 10 or 15 creepers. If there were enough creepers to scare an ocelot, it didn't bode well for the town. Rich paused, looked around at the town his family had built, and then the explosion started. It was almost as if the creepers were acting as one. Each blast rocked the town, and Rich watched in dismay as houses started to crumble. He dropped his axe. There was no point in fighting now. The town was doomed, and their only chance was to run. He climbed onto a fence and looked frantically for his family. Finally, he spotted them running down the street, away from the steadily advancing creepers. He felt a spot of hope. The creepers were all coming from the other side of town. He could lead the people and his wife and son out of the other side and into the forest. It was dangerous to go out into the woods, especially at night, but it was their only chance. With a shout, he leapt down from the fence and ran toward the remnants of the crowd. They were scattered and scared, but hopefully he could get them back together. But no matter how he shouted and screamed, no one seemed to hear him. A few people saw him waving his arms and pointing, and they would grab whoever was closest to them and run toward him. But his yells barely had any effect. Just then, Obelisk the golem reached down and once again picked Rich up. As he was yelling at the crowd, he noticed 2 familiar faces and he paused.
My wife and my son.
He thought, in this crowd? Surrounded by creepers? Then the grave reality shot through his bones with a cold chill. He put a hand to his mouth and called out.
Ian! Diane!
Obelisk immediately put Rich down so he could go to his family. As he touched the ground, Ian and Diane ran into his arms. Ian looked up to his father, panic in his eyes. With a sinking feeling, Rich realized that the blasts were just too loud and drowning out his voice. There was no way to get their attention unless he ran around to each person, but there wasn't enough time. He almost gave up then. But then a massive metallic ringing nearly shook him off his feet. He turned around and was greeted with the sight of Obelisk taking matters into his own hands. He slammed his massive metal fists into his hollow chest, and each blow let out a crash that rose above the explosions. The town turned toward the sound, and Rich took the opportunity to point and wave toward the exit. When he was sure that the entire town was following, he turned and grabbed Diane by the arm and led his wife and son at the head of the crowd. Unified again, they ran toward the other side of town. And then creepers started to fall from the sky. The green monsters appeared from seemingly nowhere and landed in front of them and fell onto its side, blocking the exit. Rich felt his newfound hope dribble away. He fell to his knees, consumed with the sudden feeling that this was not fair. Flying creepers? How were they supposed to deal with that? The creeper pulled itself up, disoriented, then caught sight of Rich and the townspeople behind him. It took a step forward, and the distinctive filled Rich's ears. He knew without a doubt that this was the end. He wished he had gotten Diane and Ian away. And then a weight briefly touched down on his shoulders, and a black blur flew over his head. The creeper's hiss was replaced with an angry yowl, and Rich watched in amazement as Soot, one of his cats, attacked the creeper with all it had. Soot's sharp claws cut into the creeper's soft skin like butter, and it stumbled away from them. The creeper fell, Soot underneath it, and lay still. The cat scrabbled and scraped at the ground, trying to work itself free, but the creeper was too heavy. Crawling forward, Rich left the crowd behind. He rolled the dead creeper off of Soot, and the cat limped over and rubbed against Rich thankfully. Rich stood, cat in his arms, and turned to rejoin the crowd. Another creeper stood between him and his family. It took a step forward, away from Rich, and he noticed it was trembling. It took another step, and the people at the front of the crowd pushed backwards desperately. Without a weapon, Rich leapt forward toward the creeper that was threatening his family. Hearing his steps, the creeper turned toward him. Something about the way it moved seemed different. It jerked and twitched, its movement sudden and small, like a bird. And then a small spark of electricity arched across its green skin, and Rich realized what it was. It wasn't nervous or hurt, it was energized. It was almost like time slowed down, all noise cut off, and he watched emotionless as the creeper started to expand. Gazing past the growing creeper, he saw Ian and Diane watching him, terror in their eyes. And then the explosion, massive. He watched the fire expand and grow. Almost like a flower, it moved toward him. At the last second, he turned his back to it and clutched Soot close. He landed. The whole world was pain. Each breath seemed to shudder within him. Only the warm, furry little body he held in his arms kept him aware. Everything was either silent or noise. He couldn't tell. Rich got back on his feet and started to run. He ran as fast as he could in the last direction he saw his wife and son. He could see everyone running around. A large, crackling boom followed by another, then another. Their homes destroyed. Rich watched in horror of what befell his town. Once a bright, cheerful place, engulfed in flames and hostile mobs running around. The golem could do so little to help everyone. Rich had no idea on how far he ran. He just didn't stop.
Diane! Ian, are you okay?
Rich was hyperventilating. He turned around. He was alone in the darkness.
Diane! Ian!
Screamed out Rich several times. He looked around. They had to be here somewhere, right? He couldn't hear any screams of agony or the onslaught of exploding creepers. Whatever happened, it was done. Rich ran back as fast as he could. He had to find his wife and child. How could he be so careless? How could he not know they weren't behind him? How could he be such a coward? He ran as fast as he could. In the distance, he could see two figures emerge from the woods. Could it be? Was that his wife and son? Yes! Yes, it was!
Diane! Ian!
He called out with a smile. They too smiled and called out to him. In the excitement, none of them saw the creepers, nor heard the familiar. Before Rich realized it, the creeper closest to his wife and son exploded. The last thing he saw before the creeper closest to him exploded was his wife disappear in smoke and his son fall. Boom went the creeper, and then beneath him the ground shook. He felt rather than heard a rumbling crack. The ground opened up beneath him and he started to fall. The explosions had weakened the foundations of the earth. Stone crumbled into the pit, and as he fell he saw ancient stone ruins build into the sides of the cave. At the very bottom, a small square of stars floated. He fell toward it. The tiny square of stars grew bigger and bigger, until it was right in front of him. It was framed by green and blue blocks, each with a glowing eyeball in them. He fell into the frame, and the patch of stars grew to be all around him. Turning over, he could see the frame still, with a different patch of stars, the night sky, with the moon outside of the portal. But as he fell, it grew smaller and smaller until it was gone. The stars grew dark.